On a sunny May day with gentle spring sunshine, Melissa Watson placed the last of her belongings in the living room of her new home. Standing before cardboard boxes filled with memories from 15 years of marriage, she paused for a moment and took a deep breath. She never imagined she would be starting a new chapter in her life. "Mom, where's my room?" Melissa was brought back to reality by her 10-year-old daughter Amy's voice from downstairs. "Second floor on the right, the room with a window overlooking the garden," Melissa answered gently. "I think you'll like it." The new house was a small 2-story home in a quiet suburb of Connecticut. Between the assets she received in the divorce settlement and her income as a work-from-home graphic designer, they should be able to manage. What Melissa wanted most was a quiet place where she and her daughter could live in peace. The separation from her husband Brian hadn't been amicable, but she had tried to avoid conflict for her daughter's sake. Amy ran up the stairs. Melissa smiled as she listened to her daughter's little footsteps lightly echoing on the floorboards upstairs. Amy had always been a curious and cheerful child. However, her parents' divorce had cast a large shadow over her. Recently, she had been waking up from frightening dreams more often, and her smiles weren't as frequent as before. On her way to the kitchen, the doorbell rang. Melissa quickly fixed her hair and headed toward the door. When she opened it, a man was standing there. He was slim with a gentle smile on his face. "Hello, I'm Charles Moore from next door. Just wanted to welcome you." He offered a small basket containing what looked like homemade cookies and several apples. "Thank you, I'm Melissa Watson." Melissa smiled and shook his hand. "That's very kind of you. Moving can be tough. Just wanted to help if I could." Charles's voice was calm, and his eyes were gentle. "I live alone, so I'm happy when new people move into the neighborhood." Melissa invited him inside. While serving tea in the living room still surrounded by boxes, they chatted. Charles told her he had been living in the area for 5 years, worked as a custodian at the local elementary school, and gardening was his hobby. Melissa thanked him for information about the area, the nearby supermarket, and the school Amy would attend. During their conversation, Amy shyly came down the stairs. "Oh, Amy. This is our neighbor, Mr. Charles." Melissa beckoned to her daughter. "Say hello." "Hello," Amy said in a small voice. Her eyes didn't meet his directly, and she seemed wary. "Hi there, Amy," Charles smiled kindly. "I brought a special cookie for you. It has chocolate chips." As he took a cookie from the basket, Amy seemed to open up a little, stepping out from behind her mother. When she accepted the cookie, a small "thank you" escaped her lips. Charles left shortly afterward. At the door, he said, "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask," before returning to the neighboring house. In the evening, Melissa and Amy had their first dinner in their new home. With only a microwave working so far, they had ordered pizza delivery. Amy talked about her new room while pulling at the cheese, already making plans about how to decorate it. While Melissa admired her daughter's resilience, she didn't miss the anxiety lingering in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Melissa asked gently. "You can tell me anything." Amy stared at her pizza in silence for a moment. "Will Dad come here?" Melissa chose her words carefully. "Sometimes. He'll come to visit you. But he won't be living here." "I know," Amy nodded slightly. "But I miss him." "I miss him too," Melissa answered honestly. "But we're a strong team, you and I. From now on, we'll make lots of memories together." That night, after putting Amy to bed, Melissa sat alone in the living room of the new house, thinking as she sipped her coffee. During the year from when separation was first discussed until the divorce was finalized, she had constantly put on a brave face, trying to stay positive for Amy's sake. But in reality, she was filled with anxiety too. This new life starting today was uncharted territory for her as well. Looking out the window, she could see the light on in Charles's house. She could make out his shadow moving behind the curtains. Melissa felt a strange sense of reassurance. At least the neighbor seemed kind. She thought that perhaps she and Amy could find a new beginning in this new place. Several days passed, and gradually the furniture was arranged and the number of boxes decreased. Amy started attending her new school on Monday, and Melissa resumed her online work. On the surface, everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, on the fifth night after moving in, Amy woke up screaming. Melissa rushed to her side and found her daughter trembling on the bed. "I had a scary dream," Amy said, crying. "Someone was watching me through the window." Melissa hugged her daughter and assured her, it was just a dream. But Amy's fear was real. After that, Amy had frightening dreams more frequently and became less active during the day, not wanting to play outside as much as before. In particular, Melissa noticed that Amy didn't want to pass by Charles's house. "Why don't you play outside?" Melissa asked one day, and Amy just shrugged. "No reason," she answered vaguely. "I just prefer being inside." Melissa worried about her daughter's changes but decided to think of it as an adjustment issue to the new environment. She believed time would solve the problem. However, a week later, Amy suddenly stood before Melissa with a serious expression after returning from school. "Mom, I think we should leave this house." Melissa stopped what she was doing, surprised. "Why? Did something happen?" Amy looked anxiously out the window.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Candlelight Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
"No. I just feel it. But, we need to hurry." Melissa placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders and looked into her eyes. "It's okay, Amy. It takes time to get used to a new place." But Amy's expression was serious. There was a fear in her blue eyes that Melissa had never seen before. From that day on, Melissa continued her daily routine while keeping Amy's words in mind. She thought that focusing on her design work might help dispel her anxious thoughts. As the end of May approached, the softness of spring was beginning to change into the heat of summer. While having breakfast, the doorbell rang as usual. Charles was standing there, offering a bouquet of white daisies that appeared to be cut from his garden. "Good morning, Melissa," he smiled. "Where's Amy?" "Good morning, Charles." Melissa accepted the bouquet and returned a slightly awkward smile. "Thank you. Amy's still getting ready. We're about to leave for school." "I see." A flash of disappointment crossed his face. "I have something I'd like to give to Amy." Charles pulled out a small box. When opened, it contained an intricately crafted wooden doll. It looked handmade, a cute little girl doll. "I made it myself." Little children like dolls, don't they? Melissa accepted it with mixed feelings. "It's a lovely gift. But Charles, I feel bad receiving such frequent presents." Charles brushed it off lightly. "Don't worry about it. I enjoy making things. And..." He lowered his voice a bit. "Amy is a special child. I often see her drawings at school. She's talented." Melissa frowned. She knew Charles worked as a custodian at the school, but what did he mean by often seeing Amy's drawings? Amy had only been attending the school for 2 weeks. "Yes, she does enjoy drawing," Melissa answered cautiously. "Charles, I'm quite busy with work today. Let's chat another time." Charles left with a smile, but his gaze seemed to peer into Melissa's house behind her. After closing the door, Melissa tried to shake off her uneasiness. He was probably just being kind. But the frequency seemed a bit excessive. That afternoon, Melissa's phone rang. It was from Amy's school. "Mrs. Watson, I wanted to speak with you about Amy," said Ms. Martin, Amy's teacher. "She showed signs of anxiety today. During art time, she drew something different from her usual work." "What kind of drawing?" Melissa asked tensely. An adult figure looking in at a child through a window. She used very dark colors. Ms. Martin seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Adjusting to a new environment can be difficult. How has she been at home? Melissa thought for a moment before answering. Actually, she's been having nightmares more frequently. There have been significant changes, moving to a new house, her parents' divorce. Ms. Martin expressed understanding but said, "Let's keep an eye on her for a while. I'll contact you immediately if there are any changes." After hanging up, Melissa thought about the drawing Amy had made. A person looking in through a window. Was that the figure from Amy's dreams? Or was it a product of anxiety created by her imagination? That evening, Amy unusually left her dinner unfinished. She didn't touch her favorite macaroni and cheese and just stared out the window. When Melissa called to her, Amy seemed to snap back to reality. "What were you thinking about?" Melissa asked gently. "Mr. Charles." Amy's answer was unexpected. "He's at school." "Yes, he works at the school. But he watches my classroom." From outside the window, Amy lowered her voice. "Even when I notice him, he just keeps smiling." Melissa tried to hide her disturbance. "I see. Perhaps he was just passing by." Amy nodded silently, but doubt remained in her eyes. The next day, Melissa finished work early and went to pick Amy up from school. While waiting for Amy in the schoolyard, she looked for Charles but didn't see him. Her relief was short-lived when she saw Amy coming out of the school building. There was a hardness in her daughter's expression that she had never seen before. "What's wrong?" Melissa asked as soon as they got in the car. "Nothing," Amy answered while staring out the window. "I want to go home." After returning home, Amy shut herself in her room. Melissa tried to work but couldn't concentrate. She kept listening upstairs, concerned about Amy. In the evening, when Melissa went outside to get the mail, she noticed Charles in the window of the neighboring house. He was also looking toward Melissa's house. When their eyes met, he waved lightly. Melissa nodded in response but felt a chill down her spine. On the weekend, Melissa was doing yard work. Although Amy was reluctant to go outside, she had specially offered to help her mother that day. While Melissa was trimming the low hedge and Amy was watering the flowers, Charles appeared in the backyard. "Beautiful weather, isn't it?" he called over the fence. "Need any help?" Before Melissa could refuse, Charles had already come around from his house and entered their yard. He approached Amy and said something to her. Melissa couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Amy's expression tighten. "Amy, go inside," Melissa called quickly. "Can you prepare lunch?" Amy complied immediately, running back into the house. Charles looked a bit disappointed but quickly returned to a cheerful expression. "She's a wonderful child. Has beautiful eyes," Charles said. "Like her mother." Melissa smiled politely but was inwardly cautious. "Thank you, Charles, I appreciate your concern for us, but..." Before she could continue, Melissa's phone rang. Looking at the screen hurriedly, she saw it was from her ex-husband Brian. That was unusual. He typically only contacted her when making arrangements to see Amy on weekends. Melissa answered the phone while giving Charles a slight nod. She walked to the opposite side of the garden, waiting for him to leave. "What is it? You don't have plans to see Amy this week?" "Melissa, is Amy all right?" Brian's voice had an unusual tone of concern. "Yes, she's fine. Why do you ask?" On the other end of the phone, Brian hesitated for a moment of silence. "I'm not sure. Maybe it's just parental intuition, but I've been feeling uneasy about Amy lately." Melissa watched Charles leaving the garden and was confused by Brian's words. "Is there any particular reason?" "No." Brian hesitated again. "Just a feeling. Has anything changed?" Melissa was about to speak but hesitated about whether she should mention Charles and the changes in Amy's behavior. In the end, she answered, "Nothing in particular. I think she just needs time to adjust to the new house." After hanging up, Melissa returned to the house. Looking out through the living room window, she saw Charles turn back to look at her house before entering his own. His gaze seemed to be directed especially toward the second-floor window where Amy's room was located. That night, Amy went to her bedroom early. Melissa went to bed after finishing her work. However, her sleep was light, and she woke up several times. Around 2 a.m., Melissa was awakened by a small noise. At first, she didn't know what it was, but then realized it was coming from Amy's room. She quickly got up and headed to her daughter's room. Before knocking on the door, she heard Amy's small voice from inside. "Mom?" When Melissa opened the door, Amy was sitting on her bed, staring at the window. Moonlight streamed into the room, illuminating her small face with a pale blue light. "What's wrong, Amy?" Melissa approached her daughter's bed. "Bad dream?" Amy slowly shook her head. There was fear on her face. "Mom, look outside the window," she said in a trembling voice. Melissa approached the window with skepticism. Peering through a gap in the curtains, her heart nearly stopped. In the moonlight, Charles Moore was standing in the garden. He wasn't moving, just looking up at the house. His gaze was directed exactly at Amy's bedroom window. "He comes every night," Amy said in a small voice. "He waits in front of my window." Melissa quickly closed the curtains completely and hugged Amy. "Since when?" she asked, trying desperately to remain calm. "Since the day we moved in," Amy's voice was shaking. "At first I thought it might be a dream. But it wasn't. He's always watching me." Various thoughts raced through Melissa's mind. Should she call the police? Or was it just a misunderstanding? Charles was certainly strange, but he hadn't committed any crime. But standing outside someone's house in the middle of the night. "Amy, let's sleep in my room tonight," Melissa decided. "Tomorrow, we'll talk about this properly." "But Mom, that man." "It's okay," Melissa hugged her daughter tightly. "I'm here with you." After taking Amy to her own bed, Melissa decided to check outside the window one more time. From her room, she could see Charles more clearly. He was still standing there, not moving. It was clearly abnormal behavior. Melissa decided to call the police and picked up her smartphone. However, before dialing the number, another figure entered her field of vision. She could see someone approaching from the road on the opposite side of the house. When the person passed under a streetlight, Melissa gasped. It was Brian. Melissa was confused as to why her ex-husband would be here in the middle of the night. When Brian noticed Charles, he quickly lowered himself and hid in the shadows of the trees. He seemed to know Charles, or at least be wary of him. Instead of calling 911, Melissa called Brian. She could see his smartphone lighting up in the darkness outside. However, Brian didn't answer. Instead, he quickly retreated and went back the way he had come. Charles, as if he had noticed something, left at the same time. Melissa's head was filled with confusion and fear. What was happening? Why was Brian here? Was there some connection between him and Charles? Unable to sleep, Melissa kept watch out the window all night, even after Amy had finally fallen asleep. However, neither Charles nor Brian reappeared. When morning came and Amy woke up, Melissa said, "Let's skip school and stay home today." Amy looked relieved. After breakfast, Melissa called Brian. He didn't answer immediately, but finally picked up on the third attempt. "You were near our house last night, weren't you?" Melissa asked without preamble. "What are you talking about?" Brian's denial was too quick and too forceful. "Don't lie. I saw you. You saw our neighbor Charles Moore too, didn't you?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, Brian sighed. Melissa, we need to talk. Not on the phone, but in person. Come now, Melissa said firmly. Don't talk to Amy. Tell me everything first. An hour later, Brian arrived. He looked tired, unlike his usual confident self. Melissa sat Amy in front of the TV and took her ex-husband to the kitchen. Explain, she said calmly, crossing her arms. Brian rubbed his face with his hand and began speaking, choosing his words carefully. To be honest, Melissa, I wanted to warn you about a man named Charles Moore, he said in a low voice. He had trouble related to children in his previous town. Melissa turned pale. What do you mean? A new employee at my company is from the town where Charles used to live. By chance, his name came up in conversation, and the employee reacted. He was a man who worked as a custodian at the school his nephew attended. Brian continued, in that town, he apparently was found taking pictures of children near the school and caused problems. The police got involved, but he wasn't charged due to insufficient evidence. However, the pressure from townspeople forced him to quit his job. No way. Melissa trembled with fear. So you only learned about Charles recently? A week ago, Brian said apologetically. At first, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to verify, so I looked up his name and searched for past records. And yesterday, I found out the address of the house where he's currently living. But why didn't you tell me directly? Honestly, the evidence wasn't certain. Calling someone a criminal is a serious matter. That's why I wanted to see for myself last night. And he saw you. No, I saw him. Brian looked up and regarded Melissa with a serious expression. I saw him standing in the garden, looking up at Amy's window. Melissa felt her body tremble with fear and anger. She looked into Brian's eyes and asked, "What should we do?" "We should report this to the police," Brian said in a determined tone. Melissa nodded but was anxious inside. "But we don't have concrete evidence. Just standing in the garden at night." The fact that Amy has been feeling fear for months is evidence, anger mixed in Brian's voice. That man is clearly monitoring her. Melissa agreed and called the police. 30 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived. They listened carefully to Melissa and Brian's story and took notes. "Mrs. Watson, we understand your concern," the older officer said. "However, at this point, no actual criminal act has been confirmed. Just the sighting of someone standing in another person's garden at night isn't enough to obtain an arrest warrant." "But he's monitoring my daughter." Melissa raised her voice. "He must have a criminal record." "We'll investigate," the younger officer said. "For now, we'll increase patrols in this area and respond immediately if any suspicious behavior is noticed. Also, please don't let your daughter go out alone." After the officers left, Melissa and Brian looked at each other with disappointed expressions. "This isn't enough," Brian bit his lip. "Melissa, let me take you and Amy to my house. It would be safer." Melissa shook her head. "I want to face this problem rather than run away. Besides," she continued, choosing her words, "we're not together anymore. Going to your house isn't a solution." Brian tried to argue but ultimately respected Melissa's decision. "All right. Then I'll stay here for a while. I can sleep on the couch if that's okay. It's for Amy's safety." Melissa thought for a moment and agreed. The presence of her ex-husband evoked complicated emotions, but Amy's safety was the priority now. That night, Amy slept peacefully for the first time in a while. Having her father in the house brought obvious relief to her expression. Melissa let Amy sleep in her room while she stayed in the small adjacent study. The next day, Brian took Amy to school, and Melissa began her own investigation. She started researching Charles Moore using the internet. At first, she found nothing, but when she searched archives of the local newspaper in the small town where he had previously lived, she found a small article about him. 5 years ago, Charles had been dismissed from the local elementary school for inappropriate conduct. The details weren't written, but the phrase, "concerns about children's safety," was used. Further investigation revealed another article stating he had been arrested. The charge was inappropriate contact with elementary school students, but he wasn't prosecuted due to lack of evidence. Melissa's heart beat faster. Her intuition had been correct. And Amy's fear wasn't just imagination. As she continued her investigation, she also found information that shortly after Charles moved into his current house, the family that had lived there before suddenly relocated. That family had a young daughter. Melissa called Brian and told him what she had discovered. "It's as I thought," Brian's voice was grim. "Melissa, you should pack your bags and leave with Amy right now." "No," Melissa said resolutely. "I won't run away. We have to stop him, or another child will be the next victim." "What are you planning to do?" "Gather evidence. If the police won't act, we'll provide the evidence ourselves." That evening, Melissa and Brian suggested to Amy that she stay at her grandmother's house. Amy initially looked anxious, but when her parents explained they had adult business, she agreed. After leaving Amy with Brian's mother, the two held a strategy meeting. Melissa proposed waiting for Charles to appear in the middle of the night and recording his behavior. Brian agreed, and they began preparations. Melissa turned off the lights in the house and sat in a position where she could see outside from a first-floor window. Brian kept watch from another window. They continued to wait in silence. As the night wore on, Melissa began to feel anxious. What if Charles didn't appear tonight? What if he knew Amy wasn't there? Would their plan be wasted? Around 1 a.m., Brian suddenly leaned forward. "He's here," he said in a hushed voice. Melissa moved to Brian's side and peered through the window. Indeed, Charles was standing in the garden. But this time, he wasn't just standing there. He had a camera in his hand and was pointing it toward the house. "He's taking pictures," Brian said, restraining his anger. "Of Amy's room." Melissa felt her body freeze. She took out her smartphone and began recording Charles's actions on video. He stood there for about 10 minutes, taking several photos, before slowly returning to his house. "Now we have evidence," Melissa clutched her smartphone with trembling hands. "Tomorrow, we'll go to the police." The next morning, Melissa and Brian went to the police station and submitted the information they had collected and the video from the previous night. This time, their complaint was taken seriously. The police immediately took action and began investigating Charles's past records. "The suspect does indeed have a prior record," the detective explained to them. However, all were cases that didn't lead to prosecution due to insufficient evidence. But with this video and the evidence that he was repeating the same pattern at his previous residence, we can take action. The police proposed installing surveillance cameras, and Melissa immediately agreed. Cameras were set up around the perimeter of the house, and a special surveillance camera was placed in a position where Charles's house was visible. "Now we just wait," the detective said. "If he takes action again, we'll respond immediately." 3 days later, the moment arrived. In the middle of the night, as Melissa and Brian watched with tense expressions, the surveillance cameras captured Charles setting up a ladder under Amy's bedroom window and beginning to climb. The police responded immediately and arrested him in the act. As a result of the investigation, hundreds of photos of children were discovered in Charles's house. Some clearly showed Amy playing at school or reading by the window, obviously taken without permission. Furthermore, it became clear that he had repeatedly committed similar acts in the past and had moved away from his previous residence as if escaping. Melissa and Brian received an explanation from the detective that he will likely be imprisoned for a long time, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. They went to pick up Amy and gently informed her that the situation had been resolved. As the end of summer approached and the leaves began to change color, Charles Moore's trial concluded. He was found guilty on multiple counts and received a long sentence. Melissa and Brian stood outside the courthouse, sharing a quiet sense of relief. "It's over," Melissa said quietly. "Yes," Brian placed his hand on her shoulder. "Amy is safe." When they returned home, Amy anxiously asked, "Will that man come out?" Melissa looked her daughter squarely in the eyes and answered, "Not for a long time." "And we've become stronger." Amy nodded and smiled slightly. It was her first genuine smile in weeks. On the weekend, when Brian came to spend time with Amy, the three had a barbecue in the garden. After the meal, Brian offered Melissa coffee, and they had a moment alone on the terrace. "This incident has made me think," he chose his words carefully. "We had problems before the divorce. I was too absorbed in my work and neglected you and our daughter." Melissa looked at him in surprise. It was unusual for Brian to engage in such self-reflection. "I wasn't perfect either," she answered honestly. "But your feelings for Amy never changed." "Of course not," a serious look appeared in Brian's eyes. "She's my daughter. And..." He hesitated. "You're still important to me too." At those words, Melissa felt complex emotions. There was an unbridgeable distance between them now, but a new understanding was emerging through this crisis. "Family is still family, even when the form changes," she smiled. The following week, a real estate agent visited. Melissa and Brian were considering moving. However, Amy suddenly said, "I don't want to run away. This is our home." "But aren't there bad memories here?" Melissa asked in surprise. "Yes, there are," Amy admitted. "But we can make good memories too, right? We've become stronger, haven't we?" Melissa and Brian were moved by their daughter's unexpected strength and looked at each other. "That's right," Brian gently stroked his daughter's hair. "If that's what you think, let's stay here." Instead, they enhanced the home's security and deepened their connections with the neighbors. Amy's PTSD symptoms were gradually treated, and she was returning to being the bright child she once was. In October, as autumn deepened, new residents moved into Charles's house. Melissa's family was wary, but they were William and Grace Johnson, a warm elderly couple, and they quickly established a good neighborly relationship. That weekend, Amy stood by the window in her room, looking at the scenery outside. As Melissa watched, she suddenly smiled. Outside, Brian, who had come for his weekend visit, was gathering fallen leaves in the garden, and Melissa was approaching him with a thermos of hot chocolate. "Our family has changed, but somehow I think it's better than before," Amy murmured. Outside the window, there was no longer fear, but a new form of family. Even divorced parents could connect through love and trust. And most importantly, by overcoming difficulties, the three had each found strength. Melissa put her arm around her daughter's shoulder and smiled, "Yes. Sometimes, after going through scary things, there might be a new beginning."